If you feel like you've lost it all, if you've recently got laid off, you went through a breakup, you are in some financial trouble, you have something where you've lost that you felt really tied to, and you don't know how to handle it, but you want to build back, continue to listen and watch. This episode is for you. Welcome back to the Chasing a Greater Vision podcast. I'm your host, Rickey Jasper. Today's topic is how to build back when you feel like you've lost it all, or when you really have lost a significant piece of you or your identity or something that you really, really love, and you're just trying to build back. I've been there before. I'm going to obviously get deep with it. I'm going to get real with a lot of situations, but I think that this is an important and critical piece to learn how to build back when things are just gone. So I always start from a high level standpoint. Number one, assess what you've actually lost. Number two, assess what you want to gain back. And number three, use your pain for positive. Now, when it comes to feeling like we've lost it all, for me and what I've realized is a lot of it is based on expectation. So back in 2018, 2019 timeframe, I think I probably had like a few $100s in my bank account. I went back to get into the IT field. And the reason why I had a few $100s in my bank account, because I was going all in on 413 apparel, and every bit of cash that I had was getting pushed into that dream. So what I did was I got back into the tech realm, and I got a job at a digital agency, and I got a call probably a week before my start date. And they said, hey, by the way, we can't start you then because this contract hasn't signed. We don't know when you're going to be able to start. And that, for me, I was devastated because I was like, I'm really like on my last bit and I don't know how I'm going to make this work, right? That, and then also on top of like mentally and emotionally still recovering from a breakup at the time, I really felt like completely lost, like I just had nothing. And I realized that it gave me a lot of skills that I use today, because in that low moment, I was like, well, I'm really detaching from a lot of things. I'm detaching from money because I don't have it. I'm detaching from a job saving because I don't have it. I'm detaching from a relationship because I don't have it. So I was like, oh, I had to really learn how to build back and figure out what that was. And a lot of it, when I started to unpack it, was there was an expectation that I had on where I should be at that point in time. And that expectation was weighty. And when it's weighty, it's heavy on you. And when that's heavy on you, you carry that around every single day. So it impacts your interactions. It impacts how you show up. It impacts when you're, conversing with new opportunities. For me, at least, like I held some resentment, so I didn't go into those things as my best self. So, when you are trying to get back, the three things that I've learned the most, and the tips in which we're going to start into, is number one, assess what you've actually lost. Maybe what you lost was good. And I say that because when we're in the midst of it, we don't necessarily realize it. As I've talked about, I've lost, I've gotten laid off by 3, 4, 5 jobs. Can't even count at this point. I've had 3 or 4 contracts abruptly end on me. And every time I look back, I'm like, wow, that's such a blessing because it led me to something better. I learned something in the process. And to be real, like I wasn't in love with what I was doing at the time. So I personally believe that God was shifting me into something different. The other thing which I really had to learn was a lot of the things that I put my identity in, I was identifying based on my ego, right? So it might have been a job where I was getting paid a decent amount, and I was like, okay, this is who I am now. This is the money that I'm making, and it boosted my ego. But in reality, it was like, well, when that was gone, well, what am I? Who am I? I felt like, oh, this is teaching me something, right? Like when things are tied to our ego and when we lose them, we kind of lose ourselves. So I had to sit back and figure out, who am I without all the stuff? Who do I want to be without all the stuff? What can I be without all of these things and identities tied to that boost my ego? How can I find that fulfillment with myself? And not every loss is a loss. And it might seem like it as a time, but that's why assessing what you've lost is such a vital piece. And if you're watching this, I'm sure you've gone through a breakup before, and it's in the moment you're like, man, I feel so deeply about this and I don't know how I'm ever going to get past it. But if you look back, you're like, man, thank God that happened, because I can't imagine how life would be if that nonsense was still in my life, right? Or if I was in the relationship and I was the one being the nonsensical person still there. So not every loss is a loss. That's why you want to assess it, because it gives you a better mental picture. Taking space away from a loss and being able to assess it is going to be so important. Number two, assess what you actually want back. Now, this I think is such an important piece, because if you see a building get demolished and you know that there's plans to rebuild the building, building, it doesn't mean they're going to build it exactly to the specs that they built it before. Maybe that building was built in the 1920s and now we're in 2024 and the building's not going to be built the same way. Yes, maybe some of the structure and some of the design might slightly be the same, but there's going to be some upgrades. There's going to be some things that the architects are going to look at and are going to say, wow, well, we want to add this in. Why? It's because the people here are going to be nuanced. The use for this building is going to be nuanced. Everything is going to be for a new purpose. So why would we build it the same way for an old purpose? For me in my life, I realized that, I'll use the financial aspect. So I went into a financial hole by bootstrapping 413, by putting everything into 413, but it doesn't mean that, I did it the smart way. I literally, every dime that I had made, I had put back into the company. I really didn't worry about myself at all. And while that sounds like a great hero's journey and everything, like there were times where I was like, I don't know how I'm going to pay my rent. I don't know how I'm going to, make ends meet. And so what that did for me was that allowed me to be financially literate. So what I did was in my build back in, using this metaphor of the building and building the building again, I was like, well, I'm going to build it now with way more financial literacy and way more thinking about the future self and also being able to take care of the present while also allocating for things that I love doing. And so now every time I'm doing something new, like this podcast, like my performance coaching and some of the, recurring, payments that I have for that and everything, I think about, hey, I don't want to be in a position where I'm putting everything into it at the detriment, not only to myself now, but to my wife, to my family, right? So that's something where when I was building back in that aspect, I was like, okay, I got to do this better. From a relationship aspect for me, I was like, well, I was so selfish. And when Carly and I started dating, and I've talked about this extensively, I was still very selfish with my time. I wasn't very present. I always felt like I needed to be somewhere else than where I was. And what I realized was as I was building into the man I am today and continuing to the man I'll be in the future is, hey, one of the main things is I have to be present. If I look back over my life when I've lost relationships and everything, I really was never present. I was always looking for the next best thing. And I realized that kind of transitioned into and flowed into other aspects of my life. Same thing with a job. I was like, okay, well, some of the layoffs happened. And when my building back happened, I was like, well, now let me, especially since I love tech, let me get aligned with companies who are in industries that really aren't going anywhere. Because a lot of what I was running into was, working for a company that was in an industry that was like kind of shaky and on, the industry was on unshaky grounds. And if economic times were right, great, we're doing great. And if they were wrong, hey, they're making cuts, right? And so I had to realize, like, let me find an industry that I loved, that was stable, and then let me find a company and organization that I could work in and grow in that it was aligned with that stability, because I didn't want to find myself consistently out of jobs. So assess how you want to build back. And then also focus on who you want to be and how you want to show up. I use the building situation. Maybe when you're building the building back, you just don't want it to look the same. Maybe when you go and talk to people and after you've encountered a loss, like you want them to react to you differently. You want them to speak to you differently. You want them to see a different presence by you. Assess that, right? Right now, who I am at 33 years old, there's people who I haven't talked to since I was in high school who they saw how in high school and college, they saw how I operated relationships. They saw how I operated whatever. And if they watch this stuff, they're like, that's phony. That's not him. And the reality is I'm not the same person. It's because of going through those things, of learning, of stumbling. It's like I've had to realize I needed to build back better for myself and also for the betterment of everybody around me. So assess what you want to build back. And then number 3, use your pain. Your pain is going to be the win in the sales. I think too often, sometimes we shy away from using pain. We shy away from using emotion, right? Or we overuse it in a sense of we just react impulsively to it. But what I've realized is when I use something painful that happens, I don't react immediately. What I do is I just kind of take it as a mental note. And whenever I need to really get down and dirty and get some things done, I use that. Now, job loss has been kind of a part of my story, right? Losing 4 jobs, contract ending. When you get those calls hurt. They suck. They're not personal. And also because they're not personal, they probably hurt even more because sometimes you're talking to a person that you felt like you had a personal relationship with you, and now they're having you're a numbers, you're just a number conversation, right? So that hurts even more. And it's like, because they've already cut off that wall, and it's like on to the next. So what I did was, in those times, instead of it letting me become very bitter and angry and I had to work through some of that, I'm like, okay, well, let me take a deep breath. Let me assess where I'm at, and I'm going to start applying. I'm going to start basically, this unemployment is now my employment, and I am doing everything I can to get my resume in better shape, to put myself out there, to make my connections, to have the right conversations, to show up the best way that I can. And I'm using that pain to continue to push instead of just sit back and wallow and sit on the couch and be depressed. If you use your pain for good, you are going to see how much of a wind in your sail it is, that it's going to push you to such a better place. If you are consistently letting the pain of a loss hamper you down, things become a habit. I bring it back to the simplest form. I think that if I can't explain something very in simple terms, then I don't have any business explaining it. It's down to habit. If something happens to you, whether it's a big or small loss, whatever it is, there are times to grieve the loss, and that time can be extended, whatever you need. But over time and for the rest of life, you can't just always opt to not take action and do the right thing. Because when you're past the loss, and I've noticed this in myself because it happened one time in my life, I was past the loss and I was so in the habit of not doing anything that I had a buddy of mine, he called me up and he goes, you're spiraling in a dark hole. And he's like, and this happened a while ago. And he's like, and I know you aren't even really talking about this anymore, but I think your habits are now something that you are fighting against. And I realized, I was like, oh, I'm swimming upstream, and I'm swimming upstream because my habits are bad now, because this loss, I haven't assessed it. So I'm just wallowing in it. I haven't figured out, hey, who I want to be. And then I'm really not using my pain to build back anything. I'm just using my pain to have an excuse to sit and do nothing. Right. So those three things are so important. Number one, assess what you've lost. Not every loss is a loss. Number two, assess what you want back, what you want to gain back, how you want to build back, and then what new things you want to implement and add on yourself. Think of yourself as a building in a construction piece that you're trying to build, the inside, the outside, everything, and assess that. And then number three, use your pain. Allow that to be the wind in your sails to keep you pushing in the right direction. If you like this video and if it helped, please like, comment, share, subscribe, and we will see you on the next episode. I'll see you next time. Peace. For free resources, paid resources, and one-on-one coaching with me directly for fitness coaching and performance coaching using my life coding system, go to RickeyJasperII.com, and I will see you there, and we'll talk directly and we'll make it happen.